This is for Isaiah, Zachariah, and Rael Merrill. It's for April Stern children. And, of course, this is for Jaden. Have I forgot anybody? Oh, of course, Amy's kids. Thomas, this is for you. And Nicole, I think you're going to like it. Oh, and my new friend down the street, Raven, I hope you enjoy it. This is a Haudenosaunee story called The Flying Head. Some people know the Haudenosaunee as the Iroquois, but that's a misnomer. Iroquois means poisonous serpents. They were the people of the Longhouse, the Haudenosaunee. Long ago, the Haudenosaunee were bothered by all sorts of monsters. There were giant mosquitoes as big as this room. There were stone giants that weren't too bright. And there were flying heads. Now, flying heads were giant heads about the size of a man with long, stringy hair. They didn't have any bodies, but they had a pair of bear-like claws that they would grab food and put it in their mouths. And they ate everything. They weren't vegetarians. They weren't meat eaters. They were omnivores. They ate anything edible. And the neat thing about flying heads, once they started to eat something, they never stopped. They ate and ate until it was all gone. Well, one day, in a village nearby, a woman had filled a pack full of food for her sister whose crops had done badly. There was corn and beans and, of course, squash, the three sisters. The woman then put her baby in a cradle board and put the baby on her back and started from her village, heading towards her sister's village. About midday, she came to the bottom of a hill and she had to take a break. And I'm going to take a break for a second and turn off the fountain. Just to make sure you can hear me better. I don't usually do that. And she stopped at the bottom of the hill, catching her breath and drinking a little bit of water. Up over the hill came a flying head. It stopped at the top of the hill, surveying the world before it, but its eyesight was just okay. Its sense of smell was as good as a dog's. It was phenomenal. And as it hovered at the top of the hill, it went and it looked down at that woman with her baby in the cradle board and her bundle of supplies, and it went, lunch. And it came flying down the hill, like a hurricane whipping around. And as it came down the hill, the woman looked up and went, oh no, I must protect my baby. And she remembered that flying heads always ate everything. So she took the bundle of supplies, ripped it open, and threw the corn and beans and squash on the ground and turned around and began to run through the forest with her baby in the cradle board behind her. She ran and ran, and the flying head came down the mountain going, and as it got to the bottom of that hill, it found all the food laying all over the place, and it went, and it leaned over and it began to eat all of that food. It ate and ate. Meanwhile, that woman ran and ran and ran for her dear life. And finally, she had to stop. Her heart was pounding like a drum in her chest, and her breath was coming in gasps. But she could no longer hear the flying head. And so she thought she was safe, and she began to walk through the forest. And the flying head, back in that clearing, it ate and ate and ate. And finally, it came to the last piece of corn and it went, but it remembered that woman and went, and it began to fly through the forest like a tornado, whipping up the leaves and the branches into the air behind it. And as the woman walked along, all of a sudden through the bushes behind her came the flying head with its long stringy hair trailing behind it. And the woman, as she looked at the flying head about to grab her and her child, she remembered. She remembered that she had heard a story when she was little, that there was magic in a baby's moccasins. So even as the flying head was reaching towards her, she grabbed off her baby's moccasins and threw them on the ground, and instantly, tall bushes full of spikes and thorns leapt up 20 feet into the air, and as the flying head reached for her, it got caught in those thorns and spikes, and it went, its long stringy hair getting tangled. It couldn't get out, and the woman, she took off running with her baby. As fast as she could, she ran and ran and ran. And the flying head was furious. It kept ripping at those thorns and tangled vines. And the woman, she ran and ran, and finally, she came into a clearing. And she was so tired. She saw a tall white pine tree there. She went to that tall white pine tree, and she began to climb up and up and up, higher and higher and higher into the topmost branches. And then she turned around over her shoulder and she looked at her baby and said, "Shh, don't make a sound. Maybe the flying head won't find us." And the flying head, it ripped off the last of those thorns and brambles, and it was mad. It took off after that woman, getting closer and closer. And the woman was up the tree holding on for dear life. And the flying head, it came through the clearing going, following her trail. And it came to the bottom of that tree and it went, trail disappear. The flying head leaned against the tree. He was confused. High up in the tree, the woman held on for dear life. But her little baby was just a baby. And so it reached out its tiny hand and it touched a little tiny pine cone, and it broke the pine cone off, and it bounced off the flying head, and the flying head went, a porcupine has got me with its quills. And it looked up the tree. And it saw the woman and her baby. And it went to the tree and it grabbed hold of that tree. And it shook that tree back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And the woman up in the tree with her baby held on for dear life, going back and forth, back and forth. And the flying head shook that tree, and above it, a huge dead branch went creak, 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 crack, and it came falling down right on top of the flying head, pinning it to the ground. And the flying head went, and it couldn't get the branch off it. And the woman, she quickly climbed down the tree. And she leapt over the branch and went running through the forest towards her village. She ran and ran and ran, her heart pounding. And finally, as the sun was setting, she came to her village. She had gotten away. As she walked through the village, she finally came to her longhouse. She opened up the deerskin door flap and went inside and took the baby and the cradle board off her back, and the baby was sound asleep. So she quietly put the baby in amongst some furs to rest, and she looked around for some food to eat, and there were some chestnuts that she had prepared earlier, and the fire was still embers, so she blew on the fire and made the embers red hot, and she took the chestnuts and put them in the fire and waited for them to cook. Meanwhile, the flying head, the flying head finally got that branch off of it, and ooh, it was mad. The flying head, it went and smelled the air, and it took off through the forest. The trees and leaves were whipping around behind it like a cyclone. And it went, and it came out through the trees towards the village. And everybody in the village went, and they went running into their longhouses. But the flying head didn't care. It wanted that woman. And it sniffed the air and flied above the other longhouses. And finally it smelled where the woman had gone. And it went to that longhouse, and it looked down the smoke hole. And as it looked down the smoke hole, it saw that woman sitting next to the embers, and it went, and before it could go down the smoke hole, it saw the woman do something very strange. The woman, she reached into the embers, pulled out what looked like a hot coal, and popped it up in the air and put it in her mouth and ate it down. And the flying head went, "Oh, fire is good to eat." And the flying head came flying down the smoke hole. The woman leapt back, and the flying head, it looked at those embers and those chestnuts, and it went, and it started shoving them in its mouth. The flying head had flames leaping out of its mouth, and it went, and went shooting up through the smoke hole. Smoke was coming out of its ears and flames out of its mouth, and it shot across the village like a comet, screaming the whole way. And everyone in the village went, "What happened? Someone has defeated the flying head." And they all came to that woman's longhouse. And she opened up the deerskin door flap and stepped out, and they asked her, "What happened? What happened?" And she told them the story of her day and how she had defeated the flying head. And to this day, we no longer know that woman's name. To this day, she is only known as Brave Woman, the only one that has ever defeated a flying head. Aho. Peace.